Hey guys, we're coming to you today with one of our students in our classes, and we're doing a farmer spotlight. We just wanted to spotlight one of our students and all the work that they're doing today. So let's introduce Zuriah. Tell us all about yourself, Zuriah. What would you like us to know about who you are and what you're about?
Hmm. Well, I'm about living soil. I'm about the Crescive Method, and I'm about growing. And I started this journey quite a while ago, actually. Like I would say, I began 7 or 8 years ago, but that was just like doing random outdoor stuff. Um, a good buddy of mine actually brought me into outdoor cannabis many years ago, and that was my very first experience with like growing anything in any kind of like professional manner, even though it was just like a small little operation with the two of us. Before that, I had just done random veggies in the garden, and then we started an indoor operation. And my first experience with that was just doing like drain to waste with nectar for the gods, the whole lineup, all that style growing, and pretty quickly it didn't really vibe with me. Like I appreciated the plants and I appreciated growing, but I didn't really like the style of growing. Like there was just so much waste. It was just a chemical concoction that you were throwing into the plant, and it didn't seem natural. And it's kind of hard to keep the timeline straight. But another good buddy of mine introduced me to the Soil Food Web School, and
Mhm.
Dr. Elaine, and that was the first time I had ever heard of her. And so and looking into that for a while, I realized like this is actually resonating much more with me, like reusing the soil, using microbes, the whole bit. So we basically changed up our whole operation and switched over to living soil. This was without actually taking any classes. We were just
Mhm.
looking at the theory of it, and we
Nice.
decided to wing it for a couple cycles.
Like you do.
And
Mhm.
yeah,
Yep.
and it worked out nice
Yeah.
the first cycle with
Common story so far. Yeah.
yeah,
Common story so
fresh
far.
soil.
Yeah.
It
Fresh one,
worked out
fresh
great.
soil. Kind of worked out. Okay. Yeah. Tell
Yeah,
us more, Zara.
I'm
Tell us
like,
more.
wow, this is great. Like what a cool style of growing. Like we get to reuse this, and then so we did another cycle after that one, and we didn't get quite as good results, but still it was decent. And then
Mhm.
we started thinking about, well, shoot, I guess we probably got to amend the soil with some things now. And so we threw on some amendments. I'm not going to name any
Sure.
names, but some popular things that we found online. Uh, and then we hit the third cycle, and that's kind of when problems started to crop up. I'm actually not sure what the first issue was.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you for certain, but I know powdery mildew was in there for sure. Um, it just started, and it wasn't so bad that cycle, but our yields were definitely less, and powdery mildew showed up. Um, the leaves just didn't look as nice. There are definitely some deficiencies going on. We didn't
Mhm.
really know what to look for exactly, but we just knew they were hungry for something or
Yeah.
there was an excess of something. Um, yeah, and then the next cycle happened, and that's when the powdery mildew exploded.
Mm.
Uh, Absolutely exploded. And this is years ago, so I'm trying to give you an accurate timeline here.
General idea is good too.
Yeah, so faced with these problems, we obviously couldn't keep throwing more things at it and hope that that it would improve. So I decided to start taking the Soul Food Web courses,
Mm.
and yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. No. No. This is a funny part of the story, actually. Let me back up.
Okay.
So after the third cycle, I decided to start taking some Soul Food Web courses, and going through the first basic foundational courses, I was basically learning. Okay, no, I apologize. The soil food web came after this experience. So, what I had done first after this third cycle and powdery mildew started to show up, I was looking online uh, at some popular resources for tea brewing
Mm.
and things like that. So this is when I decided to start getting into tea brewing. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah. Okay. So what
Yeah.
happened is I was looking at some very popular resources online that multiple people had pointed me to, and so I started brewing teas and looking. I had just gotten a microscope too, so I was just starting to learn on my own, like what to look for, and I brewed up a tea, and it took me several tries, but eventually I had a tea that was just chock full of fungi strands, tons of strands, big clumps of it. Uh,
Mm.
and so I'm like, wow, okay, I just made some really good shit. Let me just
Mm.
apply this. I sprayed it over all the plants.
Mm.
I soil drenched it, and
Mm.
then like a week or two later, that's when the powdery mildew
Yep.
absolutely exploded.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
it wasn't I actually thankfully saved some pictures of the microscope from that and posted it on the Crescive forums years
Yeah.
later, and
Mm.
Sarah confirmed to me that I actually had brewed a tea full of omycetes. Like this thing
Yeah.
was exploding with omycetes, and that's when the powdery really took off.
Yeah, I bet.
So then I
Yeah.
decided to get into the soil food web school
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I wanted to learn like what the hell I was actually looking at and what's going on here. So I went through the foundational courses, um, and learned a lot more about the various players in the system. And partway along the soil food web journey, uh, I didn't. There was kind of a disconnect because I wasn't really sure how to apply that to my garden. Like the microscope part was very difficult to get into first because I didn't really like understand what I was looking at a lot of the time, and I didn't understand how what I was seeing works together in the system. So thankfully, at that point, that's when I don't even remember how I found out about you guys in the first place, but I saw an email uh, for Sarah's microscope class, and I knew immediately I had to take that. And there was already some things going on with the soil food web school that was kind of making me slightly uh, disgruntled with it. Um,
Mm.
so I decided to take Sarah's microscope course, and that's when things really started to click into place. Because through that course, I learned exactly what I was looking at and how they worked together. Um,
Nice.
and that's when I realized, oh wow, okay, I literally brewed a tea of exactly what I don't want in my soil, and then applied it to my soil.
Yep.
Um,
And then got the results of
And
that.
then got the
Yeah.
powder meals. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and got the
Yeah.
results. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
after that, I decided to take the mineral balancing class because I had actually been introduced to mineral balancing previously, and I was just going through another consultant who would do the recommendation for me.
Mm.
Um, but I felt like that was a big gap in my knowledge. Like I didn't understand what I was looking at when I received my soil test results, and it was honestly kind of intimidating to me.
Yeah.
But it like felt like I didn't have control over that part of the system. Like I had to rely on somebody else, and it was just this big mysterious thing. So thankfully, your class was actually amazing because I don't know if it's just me, but like there's something about it that just is really fun to me. Like looking
Mm.
at all those numbers, seeing exactly what's in the soil, and then figuring out the math to get it to the numbers that you want.
Mm.
And it took a few cycles, and actually the project went dormant for a good 9 months. So when I started my mineral balancing, I uh, I had some pretty ridiculous numbers, like almost 400 ppm of nitrate in there
Mm-hmm.
because it had been sitting wet for so long, and there's certain things that were totally out of whack. Um, so it was almost like I had set it up to be a perfect little test bed for me to practice these new skills. So,
All of them.
Like the universe just said,
Oh,
"Hey, here
well,
you go.
it's kind of
Try
oh
it."
funny
yeah,
where, yeah, it's kind of funny as we start this part of the interview. What was unexpected to me is that we're unpacking everyone's journey. I didn't really realize that part of it. So
Yeah.
let me unpack a little bit of these bits before we go a little bit too further here. So basically, you started out with a starting mix, which that first run usually for people goes pretty well. And most people that were doing hydroponics prior with average or less than average or maybe slightly above average results usually at minimum produce better quality on that first living soil. They don't usually outperform the yield, but they almost always get an improvement in quality on that first harvest, which gets people excited and intrigued and they want to do it again.
yeah,
The main problems come, and there's a mineral balancing problem and there's a biological problem here with these common internet strategies. From a mineral balancing standpoint, it doesn't matter what brand you buy as far as a mineral top dress, they all are going to do the same thing. They're all going to be significantly deficient in calcium, and they're all going to be too high in magnesium and potassium. So earlier where you spoke around the third or fourth harvest it started to go south, that's the point where it goes south for pretty much everyone. Depending on how aggressive you are with the mineral top dress, depending on how bad the starting soil was, depends on if it goes south in harvest 2 or harvest 4, simply from a mineral chemistry standpoint. So I do remember now that you're talking about that, you and I went through a tremendous amount of work trying to sort out the variation of the soil, which is a whole nother animal that we won't unpack at
yeah,
this interview here. But another major killer is the variation in your soil, usually that you made, especially at the smaller scale when people are hand making them. It's pretty easy to introduce a tremendous amount of variation in mineral chemistry from how you made the soil. So we had the standard formula of putting on the top dress that everybody does, which got you significantly deficient in calcium, very high in magnesium, very high in potassium, which usually, interestingly enough, is a yield killer, which usually then sounds like then what's next, and we got into tea brewing. So we got to boost those yields up a little bit. This is something that completely baffles me is the internet advice for tea brewing. I went to a Dr. Lane workshop in 2012 and pretty easily saw that the most common trends are range from pure rubbish to not very good. And we're still doing a lot of the same things that were popular back in 2012, which is mind blowing to me. And basically, what you did from a biological standpoint is you grew powdery mildew pressure in the biological form in a tea. You've been told from the internet that these are desirable fungi. It's actually powdery mildew. Inoculated your garden with powdery mildew, and it's now exploded. So that's where we're at now, right? So we're a few runs down in the harvest cycle. Mineral chemistry is a little bit out of whack, and we've now just painted powdery mildew onto this garden. But you're getting into the microscope class, getting into the mineral class. Now what happened? Now where are we at?
well, um, somewhere along this way, actually, I did do something to address the variation, and I did forget about that actually. But this is where, so what I did is decided to hand mix every section of my bed just to homogenize it as much as possible. But when I did that, I also decided I would add biochar and
Mm.
vermiculite to it.
Mm.
And I had the vermiculite just laying on hand, and the biochar had been
Seemingly innocuous, right?
Yeah, seems not.
Seem like it should be a good idea.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And you
you
had it
know,
around, so it's
Yeah.
common to want to throw it
Why
in.
not?
This is what happens in soil making. It's like, I got it. Let's use it.
Yeah.
mhm,
Totally. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Carry
So
yeah.
on.
carry on.
This is good. This
So,
is all good stuff.
well, I did that.
Mm.
Added both biochar and vermiculite to my soil, and it did help correct some of the variation for sure. When I got my next soil test, um, what I didn't realize at the time though is I think I created an extremely unforgiving soil for myself by adding both biochar and vermiculite. Both have pretty incredible water retention, and anyways, I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But so what was next? Well, kind of went through this process of like had to chop all the mothers too because the powdery mildew was just basically infecting the mom zone as well.
Hmm.
And like we kept going through this cycle of like getting new plants, growing them up, and then the powdery would come in and take over, and we'd
Hmm.
have to chop it all down again.
Yeah.
And so eventually did correct the mineral chemistry and got some new plants. And this is kind of interesting. When the mineral chemistry was corrected, the powdery kind of toned down a little bit in the beginning during the veg stage,
Hmm.
and it wasn't till flower that it really started exploding again.
Hmm.
Um, but started to see this trend where I would get new plants, I would throw them in, and then it would feel okay, it would look all right in the beginning, and then all of a sudden powder would come in, it would just start, and it would never stop. It would just keep going, keep going, keep going until uh, I would either have to chop the crop or just eat it.
Yeah.
So I should have made some notes on this to
No,
give
you're
you a
good,
better.
man.
You
No,
can
you're
edit.
good.
No
You're
worries.
good. No, you're good. Yeah.
Keep going. You're
Yep.
good.
You're good. Yeah.
You're solid.
So this is probably about the time that I was starting to get the hang of mineral balancing.
Hmm.
And I remember there was one particular test that I got back that everything was really on point. Like everything was super on point. And I still hadn't really been checking the biology a whole lot because I wasn't all that comfortable with it, honestly. So even though my mineral chemistry was on point, I was still getting powdery mildew.
Hmm.
And that's when I really started to take the microscope seriously. So I really, it took me a lot. Like it was hard
Yeah.
to get into the microscope stuff. For some reason, there was this like resistance to it
Yep.
where I
Well,
just
because it's
felt
hard. Like it's
it's
hard.
hard. Like
Like,
it's really hard.
like,
There,
yeah.
it was definitely like a
Yeah.
some kind of barrier I had to shatter through, so to speak.
Hmm.
But once I really got the hang of it, then I started to realize, okay, wow, so I'm having these little anaerobic pockets all around my beds, and I'm realizing like the blue mats I was using, like I didn't set those up quite. I don't think I set those up in an ideal way, so they would actually give me a lot of trouble. There would be a couple floods per cycle at least, and every time that would flood, um, I would see it would go anaerobic almost instantly. And I think that's largely in part to that moisture being held for so long by the biochar and the vermiculite
Yep.
that there was just no room for error. If it got overwatered, it was going to go anaerobic. And then once that happened, the powdery started again. And I don't know how much you guys want to talk about the esoteric component to this, but it's really interesting for me to like. No,
Whatever you
seriously,
got.
Say
like
whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to
these,
say. I feel like you're
okay, this,
narrating everybody's journey so far. So I'd say knock yourself out, man.
Yeah.
This
We
is,
just want you
well,
to be authentic. Whatever you'd
yeah.
like to say.
This is the living soul journey, man.
And inspired. If
all
you're
right.
inspired to say it, say
Yeah,
it.
man. Yeah.
So when this project got really shamanic for me was when I decided to take a huge leap of faith because this had just been a hobby for me for
Hmm.
years, and I had been working a nice cushy job doing software testing, and I had a nice steady paycheck, so nothing was really riding on it. But then the company I worked for got sold, and all of a sudden I was out of
Mm.
work. So I had a choice to make. Like I could immediately go back into the same work, sitting at the computer all day, punching the keys, or I could decide to do something that I really love doing, which is growing. And um, I decided to grow, and thankfully, I had a couple incredible friends who believed in me enough to loan me a large chunk of money to buy some new lights
Hmm.
and get some upgrades for the system so I could really make a go at this. Um, so yeah, I I don't want to get too much into the finances of it, but man, like
The
it was
pressure
a
was
big
on.
it was a
Hmm.
big leap of faith and a
Yeah.
lot of pressure. Like I don't have that much problem owing money to a bank, but to owe money to personal friends, like that's a whole different story. So I decided to go for it.
Hmm.
And what happened was I started to notice this project basically reflected my internal state,
Mm.
almost like it just goes hand in hand. So the first thing that started to happen is I was being forced to face some of my deepest fears.
Yep.
And you know, some people hearing about this might not think it's that big of a deal, like, but certain things that just terrify you might not even phase somebody else, or even some tiny little thing might absolutely terrify somebody else. It just totally depends on your perspective on it. But this project uh, forced me to come face to face with some of my deepest fears around failure, unworthiness, blah, blah,
Mm.
blah, the whole thing. And I
All of it.
started to also recognize these patterns of self sabotage that I've had throughout my life,
Mm.
seeing this reflected in my grow, like the biochar and the vermiculite, I think was part of that. And even at one point, man, I dropped my one of my lights in the middle of my most
Ooh.
valuable
I
crop.
remember that. Yeah.
It's
Ooh.
like, and that was something I watched myself do. It was pretty
Yeah.
wild. Like the you know
Wow.
how the Aries lights have those little clips on them,
Yep.
and like I noticed it was just one off. Like it was just slightly askew. So I went up there, and the way I unhooked it, the whole light just like literally flipped, landed right on the middle of exactly the worst place for it to land. So
Dang.
yeah, but that's just one little example. This whole experience was kind of
Hmm.
filled with things like that.
Yep.
And at a certain point, I realized, like, wow, I am absolutely terrified of powdery mildew. And I noticed that when the powdery mildew would start to show up, it's right after I started to be afraid of it showing up,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. Not before. Like I remember seeing my plants all vegging nice and green and beautiful. There's nothing on them. Then like, oh shit, is there going to be powdery? Am I going to find powdery? And then as soon as I started to feel like that, it would show up. So yeah, I
I
I'm
remember
with you,
remember
the.
this.
dude.
I think you
I
were in
yeah,
the
yeah.
basic training at this
Yeah, I
point,
remember. Yeah,
the
I
last
Oh
remember this
yeah,
class.
part. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it
So
got deep. You're up to your neck in deepness. You
oh
got
yeah,
a no fumble situation that you got to execute. This has to go well. We've tried to kill some plants with dropping lights. We've manifested powdery mildew into existence. Then what
Yeah.
do
oh
we
yeah.
do? Now what do we do?
Oh, the aphids came too.
Oh
The
shit,
I
we don't
remember
got that. Oh
the
man, aphids.
no.
Oh
So
lord.
What
I got the new lights.
gets
I got
thick?
some new genetics, and man, they had a rough start. But then, yeah, the aphids came and they exploded too, along with the powdery. So it was
Mm.
powdery and aphids, and drop-in lights. And I don't know how I actually managed to not have to discard that whole crop.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's when I started taking the basic training, I think, right
Mm.
after that. And so the one that I was working on during basic training was the next one, where I had my own clones this time. So that was an improvement, because these plants, the ones I got, they came in 707 dirt, and they were looking haggard, but I didn't really
Mm.
have a choice at the time. So the
Sure.
next round started better. Um, and I think I just did two of the genetics. Yeah, lemon cherry gelato and lemon blizzard.
Yep.
And basically followed the same pattern, where they were looking a lot nicer in the beginning. Veg was looking great, and then I would start to get afraid that powdery was going to show up. And as soon as I started to feel that fear, it started showing up. And that's when I started looking at the microscope every day. I would spend hours. Like it took a lot of time. I think that's a big thing, big barrier to getting into the microscope is it just takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I was working all these little side jobs at the time too, just trying to make ends meet while I did this project. But then I started to realize these trends of uh, my soil going anaerobic when it would flood or when I was keeping it too wet. And also, I had to stop using those blue mat moisture meters. Like I knew a while back they were kind of bogus, but man, they were so
Yeah.
bad. Like if I had been relying on those at all, I would have been toast a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um,
It happens.
but yeah, so I got a pulse meter, and actually through the pulse meter, I started to learn what it feels like to my finger to have proper moisture. So then eventually, like the pulse meter kind of trained me to check it with my finger, and then after that, I didn't need the pulse meter anymore. But
Nice.
I was keeping my soil a lot wetter than it should have been.
Yep.
Um, so what I saw the next round after and I'll do through all this. I'm doing the mineral balancing too, and it's slowly getting in better and better balance.
Yes.
I remember one test was almost perfect, like
Mm-hmm.
literally almost perfect. I don't remember which test that was exactly, but I'm pretty sure I posted it,
Yep.
and it was like more spot on than I could have possibly hoped for.
Mm-hmm.
So I came into this with really good mineral balance, and what I noticed on the next round is kind of interesting. It was like I was being shown uh, what could happen with proper mineral balance. Specifically, is I saw a total of 3 aphids in the beginning. The first two were dying; they were all brown and like kind of struggling, and they were obviously not long for this world. And then the third one I saw was totally dead, and that was it. This
Hmm.
I'm talking literally. There were thousands upon thousands of
Yeah.
aphids, and they tried to come back. And when my plants hit a certain threshold of health, the aphids simply couldn't survive anymore. And that was a really interesting thing for me to see. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they just literally couldn't survive. Um, and then the powdery started up again, this time a little bit later into flower than before. But I started to spiral into the despair thing and like, oh god, this is just gonna take over the whole crop. I don't know what to do at this point. And this is also the last run I was
Yep.
posting. Um, so I basically just doubled down on the techniques that I had been learning how to do, particularly the microscope, um, checking all my beds throughout the process, seeing where it was anaerobic and where it looked good, figuring out some blue mat adjustments, and eventually, actually, the last sample that I sent you, Sarah, came back pretty clean. Like it was really not anaerobic at all. Um, so when I got to that state, it also kind of coincided with me coming to terms emotionally with this project. Like, okay, you know what? At a certain point, I just got to let go because I can't keep killing myself. This is like the most stressful time I've ever experienced in my life,
For sure.
actually. And that's
I
like,
feel you.
I know that might not seem like a lot to some people, but literally, like everything I cared about, all my self worth, and everything was riding on this project. And at a certain point, I just kind of let all that go somehow. I don't even remember if there was something specific that led to that, but it was kind of a survival thing. Like I literally can't survive being this stressed out all the time. I remember, oh man, the previous round I was so stressed. A bunch of my plants just started randomly herming out too. I'd never seen that. I've grown this genetic before, and
Oh
they've never
man.
done that before. They've never hermed out, but all of a sudden they started herming because I was so stressed throughout this whole process. At least that's my
Mm.
theory. I don't
I
know,
mean,
but
yeah, could be.
it, it was almost like the plants were quite literally reflecting my own inner state throughout. Anyways, enough of that heavy
So
Yeah.
stuff.
so you jumped into the microscopes, started making procedural changes
Yes,
to affect the soil organism counts,
Mhm.
yes,
and what was the net
And then
effect?
you'd send it to me, and I
And
would
send it to
I
Sarah.
would clarify
Yep.
anything
yeah,
like that, right?
right,
And that would help
and
you clarify,
yeah,
right?
Mhm.
it would help me clarify exactly what's going on, and through that process, um, I was basically learning exactly how the system worked together, all the little microbes, how they all work together, how the anaerobic organisms contribute to this powdery mildew. Because when I corrected that, the powdery mildew just stopped in its tracks.
Hmm.
Like I corrected the moisture in the soil, I corrected the biology, and the powdery mildew, for the first time I've ever seen in my life, literally just stalled. Like it was still on some of the leaves, but nothing new was growing for the last few weeks of the project from what I observed. And zero aphids, no pests. There are a few thrips, but like almost no pests throughout this. And I actually came out with a crop that was way better than I was expecting,
Hmm.
judging by how it had started. So through these procedural adjustments, I basically fixed this problem that I had been under the impression was impossible to fix. Like once it starts, it just takes over. That had been my experience with it. Um, so yeah, that was the last cycle that I had completed. And I got to see firsthand the previous cycle how the aphids just completely disappeared, and this cycle the powdery mildew disappeared.
Wow.
And yeah, and in retrospect, I believe I made myself a very unforgiving soil mix by adding all that vermiculite and biochar into it.
Yeah.
And I had been under the impression that biochar actually helps cultivate biology. And um, I don't want to ruffle any feathers with this, but honestly, I also don't really care because
Turns
I,
out.
I like to stand for the truth.
Yeah.
And so I decided to start scoping out some of the biochar. I would take the
Yeah.
little chunks that had been in the soil for years, um, inoculated with countless compost extracts. And when I took those little chunks and crushed them up and looked at them under the microscope, there was zero biology attached to them. And honestly, the chunks of this crystallized carbon looked
Yeah.
exactly the same as it did when I got it originally. So like it had not
Yeah.
degraded whatsoever. And
Yeah.
like you said, Scott, this is a really important point
Yeah.
that I think
It is.
to drive home that the microbes live on the organic matter that they're consuming. They don't commute to work.
Yeah, they don't. We've
They
been
don't
sold a
live
narrative.
in.
Yeah, they don't. We've been sold
They
a
don't commute to
narrative
work.
that microbes commute from biochar to that's not, none of that's true at all, unfortunately. But it's fun to say. People love saying it's a condominium for microbes, so I get. But what's interesting to me is you took 1 minute out of your day to answer that question.
Yeah,
Does
you had the skills
Yeah,
to do
soil
it.
food web organisms live on hunks of biochar? And you put it into your test tube, put it on your microscope. Took you less than 20 minutes to determine that that was not really a true statement.
And it doesn't make sense that they would because it's not a food source and
Yeah,
they don't, they're just looking for
yeah,
food. They're looking for ways to be able to grow. And that's not one of the, that's a very
no,
stable crystallized form of carbon that does not break down. It's not going to, it doesn't work like that. So we're not
little
trying to
pro
poo
tip.
poo.
Yeah, little pro tip. If something
Yeah.
lasts in your soil for years, microbes aren't really interested in it.
Yeah. And
So
there are much better ways
yeah,
to get water holding capacity through, more liquid forms of this carbon cycle that we're after, and that it should be moving through our systems and
mm-hmm,
feeding our carbon based life form systems.
mm-hmm,
It's not that we can't use biochar. Sometimes it can be useful, but it's not going to be feeding your
no,
microbes as you've seen, and it's not really where they live and hang out.
yeah,
There's been some talk about there being biofilm and stuff like that, but nothing is going to
no,
beat a liquid carbon source that can be eaten, and come into the full living web of this carbon-based planet. So,
yeah.
yeah, it's
Usually,
good to see.
usually in our experience, we see biochar hold a large amount of water, which leads to slightly anaerobic conditions, which can be powdery mildew pressure. So,
Yep.
not super impressed with biochar thus far.
Yeah.
But in certain situations, might be appropriate. In cannabis and potting soils, mostly problematic.
But what I'm really most happy to hear on all of this is that all the skills that you gained were applied in all together in one technique, and
Yep.
you were able to bring it all together to bring about balance, get rid of the aphids, see how you can use it to get rid of your powdery mildew, and have the results that you want, and the confidence and the skill set to know you are worthy, you are intelligent, you can do this, and the hell with all that other bullshit that's just
Yeah, man.
illusion, you know?
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Delicious things to eat. The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
So I do want to bring it back here to something I think is really important to touch base on, is that since 2016, Sarah and I have been professionally showing up to farms, doing microscope assessment, identifying the relationship between what we define through Dr. Elaine's method as beneficial fungi versus omycetes, and literally stopping powdery mildew in its tracks on lots of square footage, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, that was a really big deal to now have Zuriah, our first student, basically take the strategies and methods that we've figured out and applied them in your own garden. Like, that's a big deal for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's
Yeah.
why we wanted to have you on the show, because, you know, Nick Tomasini has done that. It's another Soil Food Web advisor, but you're the first student that's done that.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty big deal. Like, what did it feel like, or kind of walk us through, like, what was that like when you realized that you had this tool available to you that could quantify these things? You could make some corrections. You obviously couldn't pull the biochar and vermiculite out of the soil, but you could modify moisture.
You could verify.
You could verify
with your mentor.
Yep, with Sarah. What was that like? How did that harvest wrap up for you? Like, what was that like in your experience?
It felt very empowering. Like for quite a while, I've not knowing exactly what you're looking at is very disempowering, and seeing problems happen and not knowing what's causing them is very discouraging. So when I finally got the hang of the microscope and started to really understand what I was looking at, that's what enabled me to start making actual adjustments. And then having the verification from Sarah was a big help also, because then it's basically telling me like, oh, okay, I am right with this. I do actually know what I'm doing now.
Nice.
And then from that place, then that's when it just stopped. Like, that's when I was able to make the necessary corrections and the problem stopped. And that harvest actually, it wrapped up quite well for me, much better than I was expecting. So I'm very happy with it. And throughout the process, like, I do want to say, I mean, I could have easily quit many points along the way and just gone back to a nice, secure, cushy day job if I really wanted to. But it was the support from you guys and the community that really kept me going. Being able to like be honest with where I was at and posting this thing, and then having people like encourage me and just support me throughout the process was invaluable. Like, that was almost as valuable as actually learning the techniques themselves. So I really do appreciate that.
Awesome. Awesome. It was super inspiring to watch you go through it and to be authentic and transparent with everyone, because I mean it just teaches all of us, you know, and that we're all human and that we can do it. We can overcome these things, and you were overcoming, like you said, so much more than just powdery mildew. It was the fear and all these things that you were also up against within yourself, which we all encounter in our lives. So to watch that and to watch the community come together around that, around you, and just your honesty with it all, it was just you're so kind and compassionate and lovely when you write your little things out on the forum and what's happening and all that stuff. And it was amazing because everybody gathered around you, and we have a really cool community, and that was really cool to watch that. So I appreciate you, and I know Scott appreciates you and everyone on the forum that is honest and really caring with each other and cheering everybody on, and being real and being that community, because it's a rough go out there, and we're showing ourselves something different, something that's apparently can't be done, they say, but we're setting that 4-minute mile, that new stake in the ground, and you did it, and you showed everybody, and that was super super awesome.
Powdery mildew is easy, man. It just that's well, it's
well,
easy.
now he'll be able to do
it's
it.
Easy.
Now he'll be able to say that. Before he was like, what?
Well, it's easy. It's easy if you understand what's going on. What Zuriah is talking about is our private forum where all students have access to create a log and, most importantly, converse honestly. Like, I was so tired of the make-believe world that Instagram and social media has created. Like, it is not acceptable on social media to talk about legitimate problems. And, Sarah and I go inside all the farms. Like, most people are struggling with bugs and mold, to be honest. And the reason why people are struggling with bugs and mold is because there's no place to go talk about why they're there. And so then we can't talk about what the solutions are. And I tried to talk about the solutions on Instagram. Everybody thought I was a loony bin. So I made my own place to go talk. So that's what we did. So for me, I'm just happy that it worked. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a computer guy. I've had to figure out how to do all this stuff to be able to set up a social network. And that was a journey in of itself. And I'm just happy that it worked. That's all.
Well, and what was powerful about it is it wasn't us doing it to show you. Right. It was you showing you putting the method together and all the techniques together to show you, yourself and everybody else, the whole community, that you can do it. Because I think you're the first who had really been inundated with powdered mildew to that extent and had really stopped it. The rest, I think people have had other problems, but I think you were the first to really have that problem, not being able to get it to go away. There's been spider mites, and there's been other things that people have gotten rid of, but this was the first time we'd seen this,
Which takes the microscope method, which is why it's the first, because you can't, I don't say you can't, but it's a whole lot more difficult to stop powdery mildew in its tracks if you're not tracking soil organisms, Right. So
getting that feedback on the moisture, and then coupling that with retraining yourself with that meter and the microscope, what that moisture really needed to look like.
So now where do you go from there? So you stop powdery mildew in its tracks. You've got these skills.
These new superpowers.
You've got aspirations. now where does it go? What are you going to do now? You taking over the world? You starting a farm? What are you going to do?
Well, now I spend a good chunk of time working through the trauma and the PTSD. No, actually, it's not that bad.
He had me. I was like, whoa, wait, what? Trauma, PTSD.
It's interesting, actually, that I originally envisioned myself doing this little project for a while, but I'm on to other things now, and it's funny that this opportunity just showed up right at the perfect time for me to get involved in a veggie greenhouse, of all things. And this is something, it's kind of an interesting topic, I think, because when it comes to cannabis growers, I believe from my own personal observations, cannabis growers are by far the most innovative and technical growers out there, period. And they're really the ones who are pushing growing technology and methodology in a big way. Whereas food farmers, like, I'm sure you know all about this, but like from my own perspective, in my limited experience, food farmers seem very stuck in their ways. Like especially generational farms where they've been doing it for generation after generation a certain way. There's no mind paid to mineral chemistry. Usually the only thing they test for, I'm guessing the only thing food farmers really test their soil for is to know what kind of chemical fertilizers to apply.
Correct.
Typically.
Yeah, typically.
In the conventional model, for sure.
And just to kind of summarize it, it's like the fertilization and the mineral chemistry is quite old. There is innovation with like techie gadgets, like they're trying to solve problems with like Wi-Fi moisture meters. So there is like advancement in attempts at technology, but like, you know, broad stroke of the average farmer out there, it hasn't changed much in decades, really.
Still
So
urea, still,
yeah, it's still the
MAP and DAP.
same. A little bit of MAP, a little bit of DAP, and just these really harsh soil destroying chemicals. And so you're not seeing that. Whereas in cannabis, there's a tremendous drive for innovation. I personally believe it's because the quality is obvious.
Yeah.
Most consumers can't tell the difference in a good, better, or best apple, let alone some sort of extreme specificity of terpenes and cannabinoids and THC percentages, where we've been living in that market for, man, um, over 10 years now, really. Um, Almost 12, 13 years I've been seeing tests. So people in the cannabis world have been very much scrutinizing their process from a quality standpoint for a long ass time now. And so that's obviously led to a lot of innovation. On top of that, we get 4 to 5 harvests in a calendar year,
Yeah.
which very quickly you get 20, 30 years ahead of those that are growing anything outdoors personally. So, yeah, man, I think a lot of innovation is obviously coming from this realm. Not everything, but a lot of it for sure. And so now you're moving into the vegetables, though, it sounds like. So you're moving
Yeah. So,
into. Mhm.
well, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm only going to do vegetables.
Good point. Yeah.
I'll basically, what I'm excited about is being able to take all these techniques and these methods and the technology that I've learned through my cannabis ventures into the vegetable realm and grow what I'm hoping is going to be some really bomb ass veggies that are chock full
Mhm.
of a complete nutrient profile, because you have all those thousands of species of microbes breaking down all the different minerals and nutrients that the plant actually uptakes. Because in the supermarket, even if something's organic, that doesn't mean they're necessarily grown with a full microbial profile, and you
Typically
need
not.
that to, like,
Yeah.
exactly, like these plants are designed on a genetic level to work with thousands of different species of biology, so they can have that full nutrient profile. But when they're not, like, it's, if it's not in the soil, if the biology is not there to make a plant available, it's simply not going to be in the plant.
Right.
So
Mhm.
if we all started growing like this and we all started eating food grown with real biology, I think we'd see some amazing things happen as far as our own health, not just like physically, but it stems into everything: mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever. So long story short, that's what I'm excited to be doing now. And
Mhm.
I got really lucky. Like these people who I'm working for now are totally on board with
Mhm.
this. They're very trusting. Actually,
Nice.
they're very trusting of my advice and my guidance. And like, I mean, there's a little pressure there. Like, oh shit, I'm not going to betray that trust. Like, I'm going to make this the most
Yeah.
badass veggie greenhouse I've ever seen personally.
Yeah.
And I'm finding a lot of the fun in it for me is actually designing the thing, not the
Right.
frame, but like all the internals. I
Mhm.
have some 3D modeling experience, so I can model it all out, figure
Mhm.
out exactly what goes where, and design the lines and like the whole thing basically. And then they want to apply all the techniques that I've learned
Yeah.
through the Crescive school, which, like, the biology stuff
Yeah.
is key. um, gonna be going pretty hard on the compost extracts and just get the biology up as much as possible, and
Nice.
do regular mineral testing as well. I'm not quite sure how often that's going to be done, but we're gonna keep the soil in the ideal mineral balance,
Nice.
and use the blue mats to keep the moisture at the ideal level at all times. And yeah, so that's the basic system. And I'm really curious to see what kind of veggies come out. And it's going to be heated, so we're actually starting this up right when winter's setting in. So this will be a nice test to see how it actually runs through the winter using a
Nice.
wood boiler.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sometimes
that's what
it's
I'm
so
working on
beautiful.
now.
Well, as weird
Nice.
as the world's getting, I definitely am in favor of you firing it up now. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
Yeah.
it's, we
Don't
were
wait.
traveling in Spain when the world shut down for the pandemic and we came home. It's like You got like a couple cans of food and some seeds, and you're like, bell peppers, 79 days, sick. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna die before this bell pepper pops up out of the ground. Like, this is, you know, having a little bit of sustainability is not a bad idea. So,
Yeah.
holy moly. Well, I mean, that's all really exciting stuff. I had to say, like, we're like proud parents in a way, because it's like we've been beating the drum of Dr. Lane's technique to rid powdery mildew. Most people still believe it's systemic. Most of the influencers in cannabis still talk about it being
How
quite,
difficult
and
it
it's
is
like,
to
man, this
get
is,
rid of.
we solved this decades ago in cannabis timelines. So,
And now here we
um,
Yeah.
are teaching you, and
yeah,
you're putting it into action, doing it for
yeah,
yourself, breaking through all kinds of fears and barriers.
yeah, man.
And
Yeah.
Big
now
shit,
you're
man.
in this amazing opportunity. So
Yeah,
that's
man.
cool. Yeah, you'll
Yeah.
find that the vegetables are really
Yeah.
just as dank as your herb.
It will
I'm
be
sure.
in
I'm
its own
excited to
way.
eat them too. Honestly,
Yeah.
I'm excited to have access to good food.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I do want to
you're
say, like,
Hmm.
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
cut
you're
you
good.
off.
you're good.
Hmm.
Oh. So, like, this thing you did mention, like breaking through all the fears. That honestly, just as a note uh, about life in general, it seems like a big test for humanity right now is working through fears on all kinds of different levels. And even, there's always some little element of having to face a fear, even like doing this call. Funny enough, my current client is very, very anti-cannabis, the
Mm,
owner, the actual
mm.
owner. So,
Interesting.
like, they saw this video, I mean, I don't know what would happen, but
Right.
even just, it's literally like been one lesson after another of having to face fears every step of the way. So there, that is a key component. Like, if you're a farmer, I would say, like, don't make decisions based out of fear.
Mm,
Just look at the fear. Yeah, obviously there's some rational things that you should probably not do, that you might be afraid of, but, like, don't base your decisions on fear, because that never really works out in my experience. Not that I'm wise or all knowing, but, like, just in my own personal experience, every time I've made a decision based on fear, it's just created an undesirable situation in some form or other. And honestly, like, I'm not gonna hide. I don't think the time for hiding is over. Even talking
I
about these
agree.
kinds of things will get attention. Like talking about how biochar doesn't actually house microbes, uh, will get some attention. But I think people need
Yeah,
to know about this stuff
I
because
agree.
it's leading people astray. And, like,
Yeah.
knowing how the system works, learning through the Crescive Method, I didn't need to look at the biochar under the microscope to know that microbes are not eating it, because
Right.
if I know how the system works, I already knew ahead of time that, like,
Right.
it,
Right. Right.
it's not a thing. So
Yeah.
education
Yeah.
is also absolutely key. You have to know what you're looking at, and you have to understand the system, and then
Hmm.
you'll know what to do. So
Yeah.
that's, I think, like, they're
Well said.
Yeah, that's well said. I
incredible
think
Well
value.
said. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end, actually.
Yeah.
We got a good amount of time, and
Yeah.
I do hope that the owners of this project are not going to turn you away from your cannabis experience, but we have experienced a lot of that, unfortunately. It just kind of is what it is. But
Well, the
make
method is solid, and
yeah,
it's founded in the latest of latest
yeah,
and best of regenerative sciences all come together in
yeah,
one cohesive, synergistic method that just
hmm,
makes the system hum.
hmm,
It's not that it's perfect, but it is certainly the tools that you need in order to empower yourself to make those decisions, to
yeah,
walk yourself right out of disease and back into health.
hmm,
And that's the general direction that life would like to go anyway.
yeah,
That's the whole premise of ecological succession,
hmm,
is that we get more diverse and healthier and better over time. That is
hmm.
the weeble wobble, right?
Well, and I think what's, this channel speaks primarily to the cannabis industry, because that's who comes to this channel. But we apply these same exact principles to everything. Earlier today, I did a federal project that's got 2,000 cubic yards of potting soil. It has nothing to do with cannabis or even agriculture in general. Just recently did a federal project with an airport. We've worked with famous botanical gardens. We've worked with city parks and rec. We've worked with golf courses.
We're about to do a project on
To,
some
yeah,
trees.
tomorrow we're going to a really amazing property that these people own that has literally millions of dollars in trees that they're concerned about losing. It's literally the same principles. We just happen to be really good at cannabis. That's all. It's not nothing more than that, man. Like I do the same mineral chemistry strategy, the same biological strategy, the same fertilization strategy. All that stuff is aiming at the same thing: build biology in the soil, build resilience in the system, save water, reduce costs, increase resiliency. Everybody needs the same thing right now.
Same core principles.
Same core principles, man. That's it.
That's why we called it a method, is because it's not.
Yeah.
It's a method. It's just using these particular principles to bring about health at whatever context we're working with, and just applying that. So, so thanks for coming on the show. We just adore you we absolutely, we adore you in our community, and we're just really excited that you joined us on our show, and we can't wait to see what you are able to do in this greenhouse with vegetables. Your tomatoes are going to be through the roof.
Yeah, man. They're going to actually grow into the roof. Just
literally, I grew my cherry tomatoes to the roof. Yeah, so you'll have to trellis them quite a bit. So.
Right on, man. Yeah. Well, thanks for tuning in to the Crescive Method, and we'll see
thank you guys. It's been an honor.
Yeah, man.
Thanks
for tuning in. Talk to you later. Bye.